Hey, everybody. Welcome to a special Wednesday edition of Coffee Talk. I'm Ashley, and I'm here with Enid, your dual co-host of Coffee Talk, and we have a very special guest today, Dr. Maryanne Wolf, author of Proust and the Squid and Reader Come Home. Dr. Wolf, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us today.
You are my lunch. That's okay. I can't be happier than when I use time well. And so you are my lunch hour.
Well, we are so grateful. Thank you so much for taking time for us. So one of the reasons we wanted to have you specifically is one of the things that we do is we exist to serve the parent community and to educate and empower the parents who are sitting in IEP meetings and 504 meetings, working so diligently to try to get their kids the services that they need. And your work is so remarkable, and the books that you've written in breaking down so much complexity. There's so much science. You know, I think about Proust and the Squid and the history that you've imparted and what you've related to people. You talk about the invention and the evolution of language over the course of history, neuroplasticity, the different sectors of the brain for reading itself. Why can, when we talk about remediation, why can we not talk about things in silos? Like, you can't talk about comprehension in silos. So you can't talk about fluency in a silo, really. You can't talk about automaticity in a silo. Everything comes together, and you explained that so well. I was hoping you could break that down for our followers.
So I'm going to suggest first that if anyone could read some of the early chapters about how reading is acquired in Proust and the Squid, that would be helpful. I even give you permission to forget the first 3 chapters, but begin with the one that says reading begins under the crook of an arm. And the reason why I think that would be helpful to all of you is that everything we do actually begins from infancy in the 0 to 5 period. And by that, I mean, reading is not something that we have in our brain, like language, our vision, or smell, or taste. Rather, reading is this remarkable invention 6,000 years ago, and it required the brain to make a new circuit. Well, the circuit just doesn't exist. It is developing in that 0 to 5 period in its component parts. They are genetically programmed, but all these language regions, the visual regions, all these amazingly genetically programmed parts of being a human being are developing, but they're not connected. What reading does is connect those parts in cognition, in language, in vision, in affect. It begins to pull everything together. Now, what that means, a roundabout answer to Ashley's question, is that we have multiple parts that have to be developed and multiple parts that have to be connected so that ultimately you have the reading circuit all of you have now. But it's a circuit of such beauty and complexity that it takes us several years of formation for those parts to be both individually developed and connected by instruction. The reason why sometimes people get upset with me in the publishing world is that they have a false concept that reading is natural. There's even a company called Reading Naturally. It's not natural. It is one of the most beautiful processes that are unnatural, and it requires teaching. But it requires teaching of the parts and teaching of the act of connecting the parts together. So let's begin just a little bit at the standpoint of a 5-year-old. They should, by this point, during those early 5 years, have heard all of these words and the vocabulary that's going to be read. Or if it's a bilingual person, to be learning in the first language the meanings of those words. The point is, concept and word has to be developing during that first 5 years. And then at age 5, what we're going to be doing is putting the concept of words together with the alphabetic principle. Now, here's where people get in trouble. They think it's an either or situation. So there are instructors who are doing whole language and they're emphasizing all the things that are beautiful about words and stories and literature, but neglecting part of the circuit which is necessary to understand the alphabetic principle. That's the set of skills that is involved in connecting visual representations of letters, letter patterns, the very most common words. It's connecting that with the phonemes, the sounds that the language, that any language has. So in California, we have an issue that many places have, but a lot of our children don't come with the phonemes of the language they're going to read. So a very important part of learning the alphabetic principle is ensuring that the phonemes of American written English, now I'm saying American because British is slightly different, but American written English is a dialect. We have many dialects, and from a linguistic standpoint, they're all equal. But from the standpoint of learning to read, we must involve our children in
Uh-oh.
goodness.
There
Oh
she
my
is.
goodness.
We
Are
can,
you still there?
we can hear
We
you.
are, yeah. We can
Oh,
hear you.
I get so worried.
Oh,
I swear I've never done a video on a phone before. I've had every other thing happen. So why not a phone call in the middle? I
Why
don't want
not?
it to happen again. But anyway, I'm back to really trying to give you in 5 minutes
Oh, this is
how
awesome.
to learn to read in the circuit, which is not simple, but it can be explained. And it's explained. Let me go a little tiny bit back. We need the phonemes represented. We need the letters represented, and we need to teach the children how to connect the two. That is what we call decoding. And our instruction, especially for our children who are struggling for any reason, for environmental reason, or for the children that you don't want to say you love these children the most, but they have been the special privilege of my life has been to study dyslexia for many years. And children who have dyslexia need more exposures to set down the representations in the brain of letters, letter patterns, those early sight words, and the phonemes. And they need special attention to learning to connect them in what we call letter sound correspondence rules. So the foundational skills that we really need for all children, but especially for children who have any kind of challenge or different organization of their brain, as in dyslexia, they need multiple exposure to these foundational skills. Never does that mean, and here's where I really want people to think about this. Never does that mean to exclude the development of the meanings of words, their syntactic functions, how they operate in language. We want to always be thinking, how do we integrate all of those parts so that they become fast enough in their connections to allow comprehension? And that's what some people have unnaturally separated out, that you're either working on comprehension and vocabulary or you're working on decoding. That is a false dichotomy. And the more you understand the reading brain circuit, the more obvious that is, because what you're doing is learning to make the circuit work as a whole. So each of those parts are important. The orthography, all the things that we learn about letters between 0 and 5, and I mean 0 and 5. A 2-year-old. I just saw this yesterday. One of my friends sent me this gorgeous video. Actually, Carol Yago, who's the former president of National Council of Teachers of English, said, I have to see this video of not even quite a 2-year-old. She saw a sign. She'd been told what it said, don't climb. So she looks at the sign and she says, don't climb. And then she tries to open it up like a book. And I thought, oh, yes. She's getting these concepts of what a letter is, what a book is. And, I find it much better than when I'm also being sent videos of people sending me pictures of their children with books trying to scroll across them. So this is the first time I've seen someone try to open a sign. It was so great. But the whole point of this is that we are developing the knowledge of what reading is well before we try to build that circuit and build it into a connected whole. So 0 to 5, we're working on reading to that child, speaking to that child, developing background knowledge. All of that comes together in the parts of the reading brain that then we as teachers connect. And in the world of dyslexia, we need more exposures than other children to build those representations of the letters, to build the representation of the phonemes, and to even to build the representations of the early morphemes, the ing, the the s, the prefixes. So we've got a lot going on here. And because this is a phone, I'm going to have to move it to another room because it says I'm losing power. So this to be one of the most interesting experiences I have had in a podcast, and I would hope that your viewers will forgive the spontaneity.
Absolutely. Well, and that leads me to my next kind of comment question that I wanted to bring up from Proust and the Squid is you talk so much about, just now you spoke about language and the importance of all aspects of language, but something that really hit me, and I have a master's in speech pathology and audiology, and so understanding language, but we don't talk about pragmatics a lot, and I love that you brought up pragmatics and early pragmatics development with the children when they're sitting on laps and listening to stories is how they learn how to feel their own emotions and how they learn empathy. And I love that. So I didn't know if you could touch on that a little bit more.
One of the most beautiful parts about early reading to our children, and there's such good research on this. There's research even showing imaging of the child's brain who's been read to, and it's so convincing. But one of the things that people don't talk enough about, what Frog does to Toad teaches your child to have empathy when Frog is sick or when Frog is sad. One of the absolute beauties of literature, whether it is Charlotte's Web or George and Martha or Brothers Karamazov and Middlemarch, we learn to leave the egocentrism that we all have, but especially children have. We learn to live a life of other. We learn to understand what another person feels like when they're sad or sick or in situations of difficulty or situations of elation. Now, I think some of you who have read Proust and the Squid know that I grew up in the tiniest town in the Midwest. And to be sure, I mean, this is kind of a joke, but there's no one within 25 miles who had ever gone or thought of going to Harvard, for goodness sakes, from my little town where I went to a 2-room schoolhouse. I mean, there was, you Californians, of course, now I spent most of my life in Boston, but you don't really know what it's like to live in a tiny rural town where you explore the world through books. But that was my introduction to the world of literature and knowledge, but it was also my introduction, and I have to say this, to moral development, to ethical development, because it was what I learned about how others think and feel that taught me a whole other version of the people that I would ordinarily never meet in this tiny little town in Illinois. Barack Obama said that at one point. He was meeting the great novelist Marilyn Robinson and having an interview with her. And he said, it was the novel that taught me empathy. It was the novel that taught me the nuances, that things weren't just black and white, but gray and every gradation in between. I was learning about who others are. And Marilyn Robinson said something just so beautiful, but so hard. And she said, the trend towards seeing other as dangerous, as enemy, is the greatest threat to our democracy.
Yeah.
And I really want to tell all of you what Ashley and Enid know so well, and that is books are our frigate, Emily Dickinson's frigate. They are our frigate into the lives and feelings of others, and that is our laboratory for empathy, for moral development. And there's very little that could ever be better than that. And when I say that, I mean better, because it's both an interaction between that parent or that the person who's reading and the child that is very different from what happens on a screen or an audio version. We are giving the child something so special under the crook of an arm.
I have to ask you a question, because of course I've read Proust and Reader Come Home, and I listened to your closing address with the IDA.
Oh, yes.
One of the things that strikes me so profoundly about you is, to me, you seem to have a classicist education. I've heard you quote Flaubert, and of course you reference Proust and Donne and many others of, what's considered the great writers in past centuries. And so I have to ask you, because I was an English undergraduate degree.
Takes one to one, actually. No one.
So I'm always struck when people do that, because you don't see people reference the great classicist writers very often. And so I have to ask, how did you go from what is clearly a very classicist literature education to where you are as a neuroscientist?
Ashley, it's a joy to tell you that I have 2 degrees in English and would have even finished, or I was enrolled in a PhD in comparative literature and thought that's what I was going to do. I'd always taken psychology courses all along, and theology and philosophy. And there is no question that I had what would have been called the classicist educated mind. That was one of the greatest gifts to me, that I was given that. I was given it, and I worked very hard for it too. But what happened was that I was going to actually become a scholar of Rilke, the poet. The Duino Elegies was one of the most powerful works of poetry I think that has ever been written. And I was studying it in great depth in a master's, along with English literature. But I decided that I had to do something like a Peace Corps stint between my master's and my PhD. And I was volunteering my year in an organization that usually works with Native American populations or in Latin America. And I was supposed to be in North Dakota when, literally the day before practically I'm to go, I'm called and said, we're sending you somewhere else. And they sent me, of all things, to Hawaii.
Nice.
There's no political cachet in telling your friends you're going to volunteer in Hawaii. Let me tell you,
Right.
believe it or not, I was deeply disappointed until I got there and realized that the school which had been deserted, is at a plantation where basically people were indentured. And we served these children. All of us were volunteers from the mainland. And I thought with 2 degrees in English literature, I could teach anybody to read and love literature because I loved it so much and I love kids. So what's missing here? Well, I failed. I truly failed to teach at least 10, 20% of the kids could not read after working with me and having the most loving relationship. I still go back and I still have at least one family that I keep up with after all these years. And they are the ones who taught me that literacy is the foundation for everything in education. And that if you are not literate, you will never reach your potential in the same way. So I put everything aside and said, I'm going to study first psycholinguistics, understand language. And then I went to the Harvard Reading Lab where the neurologist Norman Geschwin made such a powerful impact on my life. His student, Martha Denkla, became my mentor. And I just really went between MIT, did linguistics with both Chomskys, Carol and Noam, and did work with Geschwin, with Denkla, and then most of all, with Jean Shaw at the Harvard Reading Lab. We really had a time in which neuroscience was not even called neuroscience then. It was more like neuropsychology, neurology, linguistics. They were more separated. Now they're all together in what I do, which is called cognitive neuroscience. But that time in Hawaii, learning what was going to be the fate of kids, because I failed to really know how to teach, that was it. I changed my life to understand how the reading brain works so that I could use that knowledge to better teach teachers, to better understand challenges, environmental ones like the ones I had in Hawaii, or it then became very clear to me that the study of dyslexia was one of the most interesting studies because it was nature's way of giving a different organization to the brain that was very strikingly disadvantaging that child for learning to read, but advantaging that child for other things. And so I became fascinated with what the brain and the different organizations could teach us about teaching, prediction. So by now, even though I am fully in the world of neuroscience and science and education, to return, Ashley, to you and your degrees in English, it is the love of language that propels me every day, and the love of literature propels me at night. So if I would show you, I will show you, you won't believe all the books that I have every day, every
Oh,
night.
I believe it.
You see this? It is such a mess of books. But I bookend my day, and my morning and my night are about books and what they can teach us and what they can do to elevate our spirit during this time when books are probably our best antidote to the despondency of our world.
I love that.
That's another long answer.
No, we love the long answers.
Wordy.
It was perfect. I have a question from a parent that has, she said, listen to Proust and the Squid 3 times, but now she's now going to read it. And she says that what is your best advice as how to bridge the gap between parents and staff when going into the schools, trying to get services for their children, but wanting to educate at the same time. So for a lot of teachers that don't have the knowledge and the understanding that you're talking about.
Right. Well, is your parent in LA by any chance?
In Arizona.
Oh, in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I would always suggest is that the school system has opportunities for professional development that parents can advocate for. And there are really good professional development. The reason why I said LA is that LA is now working on micro-credentialing. And that's a really important asset for teachers. Micro-credentialing in neurodiverse learners, micro-credentialing in the science of reading. There are professional development programs. AIM Institute has one that's excellent. There's a cost in all of these. Letters has Louisa Cook Motes has letters.
Yeah.
There are various ways that we can really insist as parents that our teachers have the benefit of increased knowledge that they can get in these professional programs. And I would encourage parents, I know they're decoding dyslexia groups in Arizona as well.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Hi.
Here she is. Whoops. We've lost you for a moment.
We don't have your audio.
I know, we've lost our audio. Can you hear us?
Oh, we get her back?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, there you are. Okay.
There you are. we lost your audio for about a minute.
What should we do? Try to go back? Anyway, the idea is that we don't criticize, we give opportunities. Yes. That's what I want our parent advocates to do, to offer opportunities and to work with the school leadership. And state leaders can be a big, big help. We passed a bill last California called Neurodiversity and Learning, in which we got money to help schools of education provide the science of reading. So we're transforming syllabi and the opportunity of learning this knowledge for bills at the state level can also be a piece of this algorithm. There's a book called Literate Nation that it's slightly older now. In fact, I'm going to work with the author to update it, but it's called A Literate Nation, and it's a blueprint for a literate nation, and it's by Cynthia Coletti. And we're going to update it in the coming year, but it provides all kinds of ways for parents to work with schools, to work with states, and to form advocacy groups. So that would be a really fine introduction for parents on what to do.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Did you have?
I did. So in your closing speech at the IDA, and I'm in Houston, and you were actually in Houston about this time last year, and you gave a speech at Briarwood, which I was signed up. Yeah, which I was signed up to attend, but I couldn't get away from work in order to attend it. But some of my friends and some of my family members were able to go. And one of my friends had a very specific question she wanted me to ask, and she was thrilled when you brought it up in your IDA commencement address. So you talk about, in your research, you believe that Leonardo da Vinci to be dyslexic. Can you expand on that and why you think that, or what evidence you're looking at? Because so many people talk about, that he must be, but then there's the belief within the community that unless you have a diagnosis, you shouldn't be talking about historical figures. But you, of course, are the leading expert. So if you're saying it, then it must be true.
Well, it just happened that and let me step back. I never give a diagnosis without being with the person. So email after email, I have to tell people I don't do that. And one shouldn't. And one shouldn't do it historically either. So I'm going against my own rules. And the reason is because I was asked by, of all places, the Smithsonian to do a video on what I thought about whether Leonardo da Vinci was dyslexic. And in preparing for that, it's very brief, but preparing for that video, I steeped myself in the literature about him, Vasari's biography, which is both really fascinating and a little fanciful. I also had the great opportunity of going to see the Atlantis Codex in Milano, and really I was able and given through the publisher in Italy who translated my book to see and witness the genius of Da Vinci in some of these codices that are in these libraries that are just it was like a little miracle for me to be able to visit and go through some of this material and see it firsthand. But in the process of doing this background work, it became clear to me that he represents the absolute apex of the strengths that can co-occur with dyslexia, as well as some of the more unusual weaknesses that are less understood, but so often there. So let me give you a few examples. He was, of course, always thinking outside the box. But he was thinking outside the box in very interesting ways that have a lot to do with spatial organization. There's a test done by a colleague of mine, Ellen Winter, and one of her former students, that is a test of what's called the impossible figure. Is this figure that looks impossible, is it real? Could it be real, or could it not be? Well, my brain could never look at that and decipher a thing. I could no more decode the geometry of that figure than the man in the moon. Well, a dyslexic can. And Leonardo not only made some of the most fascinating geometric configurations, probably than it ever happened before, in some of his designs for military and engineering feats by castle owners who wanted to protect their fortress. And so he built things that were amazing, ladders that are apparatuses that would throw off the people who were having ladders climbing into the castle. He had huge caverns that had designs for that would entice the enemy to think that they can go underneath and go into the castle, and then he floods it and drowns them all. I mean, it was unbelievable, the inventions this man had, the ability to make analogies, all of these really amazing skills that so many people with dyslexia possess as well, who have these geometric spatial advantages, or let's just say they are strengths. Well, he had them like probably nobody else. He was an artist like so many artists who are dyslexic. If you look at the 20th century, it's just full. Why is that? What are the particularities of the skills? Well, now is it okay so that the spatial allows a more geometrically gifted mind? Well, it's interesting, but it's more interesting when you put it side by the fact that he couldn't do algebra. In other words, what the very strength that you would assume, oh, just, oh, he's great in all aspects of math. No, in particular aspects of math, he's extremely weak. In particular aspects of language learning, he was either a genius or could not retrieve words if they were in Latin. He, in an Italian language, could not learn Latin. That was the reason why he was not able to go beyond this more elementary school and become a lawyer, an advocate, like his father had wanted him to be, but he couldn't do that work, and he would consider himself. He used the term illiterate, but a litura. But what he was really saying was that he couldn't become that quote unquote literate mind because he couldn't learn Latin. Why? He couldn't retrieve it. Now, add to that, and retrieval is an area of study that some of you know I have worked on since my very dissertation as one of the processes in dyslexia that is most interesting that goes awry. Now, those of you who know some of my work know that Martha Dinkler, my mentor, and I um, basically published the RAN-RAS naming speed test. Well, this is a test of retrieval of how fast the brain can put together visual information with linguistic information. Well, the retrieval processes that Da Vinci had, I believe, are connected in the same way to the speed with which he was not able to connect uh, the word, the image, and the word, and retrieve it enough to learn Latin. Now, we're not talking about learning Russian or Hebrew with different orthographies. We're talking about a language that Italian is based on that he couldn't retrieve. And so the depth of his retrieval problem, the geometry versus algebra, some of these other indices that were so striking in the Vasari biography, in which Vasari reports that when asked what Da Vinci really wishes he could have in his life, he said, if only I had someone who could just stand by me and read to me. This is the sign to me of someone who probably would, if he were existing now, would have a fluency-based reading issue. And that, of all things, is the area that I have been so, felt so lacking in our diagnosis of dyslexia, that we neglect those children who are the only index they have, especially early on, is a retrieval speed problem as indexed by the RAN. Well, if I had a time machine, I would bet $1,000 that Leonardo da Vinci's retrieval speed is really what made his inability to learn Latin and his probable more laborious reading, even though Italian is so regular that of course he learned it, and of course he had a beautiful library and read, but I bet it was more laborious for him because of this. And if you put all of those things together, you have this story, if you will, of some of the greatest strengths that a person with dyslexia frequently, not always, frequently has, and some of the most striking weaknesses. So all of that made me convinced that he is the the finest example of the constellation of strengths and weaknesses that the dyslexic brain has. And
Wow.
I can always be wrong.
Wow.
I love it. Little disclaimer. Can you talk a little bit more about fluency as an issue that keeps coming up in terms of in the schools? I will go into IEPs where there are fluency and comprehension goals, but there aren't the underlying skill goals that you talk about. Are you there? Oh, so I'm wondering what you would recommend as a good assessment for people to determine. Are we there? Uh, flu- Fluency versus okay,
I
fluency
think she's still.
versus dear. skill development. So if that makes sense. So a way to assess, oh yeah, I think we're losing her. Can you help me fine tune that question, Ashley?
I think you're talking, so if I am understanding you correctly, you mean the concept that fluency
Exactly.
isn't purely how fast you can read?
And it's being assessed with
So
timed tests, when I think there should be a better way to, a more
right.
effective way to assess.
Well, because I think it's so
Right.
vastly misunderstood. I think that people think that it's purely how fast you read, when if you look up the definition of fluency, you can see that it's inflection and all of these other things. It's not just we
Well,
have,
and
you know.
Exactly. Well, and like when she talks about all the intricacies of learning to read, and it being all these aspects of language, and in order for all those to be, all those things have to be in play together for you to have strong, to be able to read quickly, because it's automaticity. So you can't have automaticity in reading at a higher rate of speed if you don't have the skills necessary to do so. You're back. We were kind of.
Are we back?
We're back.
So Ashley's gonna ask the question again.
I'm so sorry. I tell you, this is that I recommend to everyone. It's very hard to find. It's called The Blessings of Imperfection. So we'll title this whole session The Blessings of Imperfection. Get the information any way you can. So
Exactly.
Your question, Ashley, you probably should.
And kids feeling like they have to read quickly. And so we were, wanting more understanding, help people understand the concept of, in order to have automaticity, you need to have all those things you talked about earlier.
Yes.
And what would be a good way to actually assess fluency in an appropriate way?
So the real problem with fluency is that it has been so misunderstood as one thing. And the reality is that fluency is contributed to by the knowledge of the orthography, the decoding itself. It's contributed to by morphology, by vocabulary knowledge, by syntactic knowledge. All of that contributes to fluency. So when you simply read a word, that is not going to give you a full view of fluency, because it's only giving you one piece of it. So, and by the same token, those people who are using repeated reading over and over again to address fluency, that's going to make that child very fluent on that passage or that story, but not generalized.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you can always use to complement what you're doing. But to really address fluency in intervention is to go after the speed of processing all of those different contributors: orthography, semantics, syntax, morphology. Morphology is extremely important for fluency.
Very
so
great. No, I'm really glad you say that, because and it's interesting how many students just drop off word endings when they read because they don't have strong morphology skills, and so that's going to change fluency and comprehension. Yes, that's so important.
Pete always a lot of work on morphology. I believe it's more a part. The whole, I think he puts even more emphasis in.
Oh, I wish I could hear what she's saying.
I know, because it's brilliant.
I know everything she says is brilliant. We're having a little bit of a hard time here.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can boost her sound.
We're having a hard time. Sorry.
I know.
Oh. 3, 4 orthographic.
Oh man.
I think it's time to upgrade and switch to Zoom.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely.
Somebody else.
Oh man. Does she know we're having a hard time?
Dr. Wolf, can you hear us?
We're having a hard time hearing you.
It's like she kind of cuts out for a second, and then I mean you hear like a CB kind of thing, and like comes back. Not yet.
I don't know what's happening.
I know, we haven't had this problem before.
I know. Oh man, yeah, we got to switch platforms.
We do. Hold on.
Okay, we're gonna just bear with us 1 minute. Oh my goodness, this is just. I could listen to you all day, Dr. Wolf. For a second there. Oh man.
Talk again?
Are you back?
Not yet.
We can kind of hear you.
You can hear us?
Can you hear
Now
me?
a little bit, yeah.
A little bit. Not much.
If I do
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
yes. If you do that.
let me see if I can do. If I do this, does
Oh
that
yeah, we
make
can hear
it
you
better?
now. Yeah.
Perfect.
Say what you were saying about
Okay, I'll
morphology
just-
because it was brilliant. It's always
It was.
Okay, I'll repeat about morphology. Morphology
Sorry.
is the secret sauce. Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. I consider morphology the secret sauce to fluency because it gives orthographic patterns that can become a very small chunk, but instead of 3 letters, it's just 1. So they won't lose them with a long word. And the same thing with our prefixes. They will be able to actually reduce the orthographic load to 2 or 3 units instead of a 9-letter word. So orthographic chunking, semantic clues to what the meaning of the word is. So the more you know about pre and post and all the prefixes and suffixes, the more meaning is attached. And also it gives syntactic information. So it tells you what part of speech and how this word is used in a sentence. So morphology is one of the really important contributors to fluency. So, but to go back to your question, when you talk about how do we measure, how do we address fluency? We measure fluency in various ways, not just one. One word recognition fluency task is not going to give you what you really need. You need both a sense of how that child is going to read a paragraph, and not just in terms of speed, but also so that you know they are understanding. Because fluency is not just speed. Fluency is the bridge between a whole set of processes and comprehension. So you have to think of it as a whole. And when I think about testing, I think of the testing of the whole. And part of that fluency also is simply the very basic RAND task, which says how fast can that person identify a letter and put a label on it. So there's so many things that go into fluency. I actually wrote a paper with Tommy Katsir Cohen many years ago for a special issue. I believe it was Reading and Writing, a special issue on fluency. But in that article, I go into all the contributions that go into fluency. It's not the simple how fast you read a word.
That's why I wanted to ask you that question. And really quickly, I just want to clarify for those who don't know, RAN is rapid autonomic naming, correct? And it's the ability to be able to say, circle, blue circle, red, and being able to access something quickly from there, correct? I just want to make sure.
Right. So what are called naming speed tests. This was the first one.
Yeah.
It's called RAN or RAS. Rapid automatized naming is the one
Automatized.
where you read. Yeah, you
Mhm.
it was very, very, very close, Edith.
Yeah, I know.
But you have the child read 5 rows of letters or numbers or colors or objects, and it's the one that we designed has 50 stimuli, but it's just 5 of them repeated 10 times. So it's not testing knowledge of letters at all.
Right.
It's testing the speed with which you connect visual and language processes. So when we talk about fluency, I use that as a base of what is then layer by layer. How do they do in words? How do they do in words and phrases and in sentences and paragraphs?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I am going to have another Zoom call very soon. My lunch hour was literal.
Yeah.
So
I'm
going to have, why don't we end with one last question and an apologia for literature and the brain and our children. No matter what we do, it's worth all the efforts your parents, your teachers, and you do to give them the reading life. That's my apologia. To give our children a reading sanctuary during this time, even if it's really simple for them. Find the level they are, give them that level, use books, use book lists. We're going to have a Haskins Laboratory resource library for people very soon. It's already up, but we will have book lists for children and Lexile levels. Just never give up. It's our marathon to give them their reading life.
Thank you so much for your time.
Very much. I mean, we're so grateful that you could take the time. I'm sorry for the technical issues. There's no perfect platform, unfortunately.
It's just
But we
true.
appreciate
It's
your
just true.
patience today.
But I thank you for doing what you're doing for the community of learners and parents, and educators. So thank you, Ashley and Enid, and thank all your viewers. And apologies if I'm intermittently there. You can read my books. Luckily, I can say that. Read or Come Home might be the best one for many people right now.
They're
Since it talks
both
about
brilliant.
digital.
So thank you for
Thank
everything.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Godspeed and
Thank you.
peace, everybody. Be well.
Be well.